Okay.
Right, welcome everyone. Results of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the requirements for social distancing, this public meeting will be held electronically in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001. The regular meeting of council will be preceded by a public meeting to consider proposed zoning bylaw amendment application pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act. I would now ask that the clerk take a roll call and advise of the members who are participating in the meeting today. Mrs. West.
Thank you. Mayor Robinson.
Present.
Councillor Gregory.
Present.
Councillor Malott.
Present.
Councillor Ryman.
Present.
Tim Hunt, CAO, Director of Operations.
Present.
Sherry Brisbane, Chief Financial Officer. Kim Dixon, Chief Building Official.
Present.
Steve Goldman, Environmental Services Supervisor.
Present.
Patrick Shoebottom, Fire Chief.
Present.
Thank you. And myself, Lori West, Clerk.
Thank you. For our public meeting, it's regarding application Z01-2021 for 279056 Ontario Limited, McNabb Lumber, 9 McDougall Road West. We're having a presentation tonight from the planner, from the applicant, Morgan Planning Development presentation, and a staff report prepared by Jamie Robinson and Shane Connors from MHBC Planners. The applicants have applied to rezone the lands from the C1 commercial zone to a site-specific C1-4 commercial exception 4 zone to add a building supply use as an additional permitted use, to establish a 20-meter setback across the easterly lot line, and to permit accessory buildings with maximum heights of 12 meters. I would now ask the clerk if you received any written correspondence on this file, or would you like me to do the presentations first?
I'll just make note of the written correspondence
Okay.
and move on. Written correspondence was received from Dave Thompson, Director of Development and Protective Services for the town of Parry Sound. Mr. Thompson suggested that the environmental studies be completed prior to approval of the zoning bylaw amendment in order for the town to have an opportunity to review prior to any approvals. Council has circulated on this correspondence in advance of the meeting.
Thank you. I'll now open the floor to Morgan Planning and Development for their presentation on behalf of the applicant. I believe you're present. If you're welcome, and if you can introduce yourself.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. My name is Josh Morgan. I'm a land use planning consultant based in Aurelia, and here today representing the property owners with their zoning bylaw amendment application. If I could just start out by saying we have actually quite extraordinarily high winds in Aurelia right now, and I'm somewhat concerned I'm going to lose my internet connection in the middle of my presentation, which has only happened once in the last 2 years of virtual public meetings. So if that does occur and I drop off your screen, I will call into the Zoom number that has been provided to me, okay? Just as a warning, if in the event that happens. If I could ask, well, actually, having never presented to the municipality of McDougall before, if Ms. West could advise whether she would like me to share my screen to illustrate the PowerPoint, or whether Ms. West will share her screen, and I'll just ask for the slides to be forwarded on.
Mrs. West, what's your preference?
It would be preferred if you share your screen.
Okay, perfect. I will do that. Okay, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so again, here for a public meeting related to a zoning bylaw amendment application pertaining to 9 McDougall Road West, which is illustrated on the screen. I'll describe the property and show some pictures, but before I do that, I think what I'll do is just explain the purpose of the application. So the property is zoned C1 or commercial 1, and the application proposes to rezone the property from the parent C1 zone to a site-specific C1 zone. The site-specific C1 zone that is proposed, the primary purpose is to add a building supply as an additional permitted use. and also to establish a 20-meter setback across the easterly lot line and to permit accessory buildings with a maximum height of 12 meters. This is just an aerial image which provides some context for the land uses surrounding the subject property. So you'll see, if you can see my cursor, you will see the subject property in the middle of the screen here. It's a large, approximately 30-acre piece of property with approximately 250 meters of frontage onto McDougall Road West. There is some rural residential development, as I'm sure members of council are aware, along McDougall Road West. There is a salvage yard which abuts the property to the east. There are vacant rural lands to the south. Of course, the Highway 400 corridor to the west, and to the north, rural residential lands. So I think, vehicular access to the property is pretty evident. It's from McDougall Road West. The property is currently vacant. It is undeveloped. There is a cleared area of land in the middle of the site here. But other than that, it's the property remains in its natural state. So just some pictures to provide some context here. I visited the property it would have been in early August or late July of this past year. I have not been up there since, but so these pictures were taken at that time and reflect the nature of the property when I was there in the summer months. So this picture would be with my back facing north and myself looking south into the one of the vacant or the vacant portion of the property. The photograph on your left here would be facing to the northwest, I suppose, looking, I guess, northerly up the 400 corridor. The picture on the right-hand side of the screen here is just an image taken from McDougall Road West, looking into the property. This is the existing driveway entrance into the subject property. And then this picture at the bottom of the screen is an image of the property as viewed from Highway 400. So these are just excerpts from both the municipality zoning bylaw and official plan. The entirety of the subject property is zoned C1. And the entirety of the property is designated rural by the municipality of McDougall's official plan. We had prepared a site plan in order to illustrate it's a conceptual site plan, but what this does is it illustrates the form of development that is proposed here and the approximate location of that development. So I think this site plan is helpful because it illustrates sort of like the scale of the proposed building supply store in relation to the 30-acre parcel. And it helps me, I think, understand and illustrate to council and members of the public what significant setbacks are enabled by the size of this property. So you'll see setbacks of approximately 200 meters from McDougall Road West, approximately 139 meters from the easterly property boundary, and more than 275 meters to the south, and approximately 80 meters from the MTO corridor. So quite significant setbacks being proposed here. I can come back to this if there are questions that relate to the site plan during the question and answer period. So as I'm sure Mr. Robinson will touch on, or certainly has within his staff report here, as with any Planning Act application, we need to first understand what the provincial policies say, and then work our way sort of down the ladder to the municipal official plan. So I'm going to be very brief, I think, with my overview of policy. In this case, we first looked at the provincial policy statement, and the most relevant sections of the provincial policy statement that relate to this application would be the rural area and rural lands sections of the PPS, the employment section, and the natural heritage section. So commercial development is permitted within rural areas, and job creation within rural areas is also certainly permitted and encouraged if it can be done so in a responsible way, meaning that all natural heritage features are protected, that the project is compatible, etc. So In viewing the application through the lens of the provincial policy statement, it's our opinion that the zoning bylaw amendment to add a building supply as an additional permitted use is consistent with the provisions of the 2020 provincial policy statement. So after looking at the PPS, of course, we looked at the growth plan for Northern Ontario. We looked at its guiding principles in particular, and also at its long range planning direction. So my comments and sort of analysis in relation to the growth plan are quite similar to my comments related to the provincial policy statement. It is our opinion that the zoning amendment to add a building supply as an additional permitted use conforms to the direction provided in the growth plan, as the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would provide a great opportunity for diversifying the local economy and strengthening opportunities for employment. So in terms of, these slides are hard to prepare, I hope you can appreciate, because we're taking quite massive policy documents and trying to summarize them into one slide here so as not to bore the crowd and just to get the most pertinent information out there. So I'm happy to answer questions that may arise related to policy. I'm trying to keep this as brief as possible so that I can provide an overview here. So the property is designated rural, as I mentioned, within the McDougall official plan. New commercial and industrial uses are permitted within rural areas, subject to suitable compatibility considerations, which would be enforced via the site plan control process. Section 4.14 of the official plan encourages the municipality to respond to demand for additional growth in order to buffer the effects of increased servicing costs. Section 4.18 states that the municipality will support industrial and commercial activities so that jobs may be provided on a year-round basis. And Section 12 provides direction regarding commercial and industrial development within rural areas. We have had due regard for those sections of the official plan and have reached the opinion that the zoning bylaw amendment to add a building supply as an additional permitted use meets the intent of the McDougall official plan. So my next slide here, and probably my most important slide, speaks to land use compatibility. So with any planning application, no matter how big or how small, land use compatibility is really, in my opinion, the most important thing to consider. So just high level overview of why we believe this addition of a building supply to the C1 zone is appropriate and compatible. First of all, the property is vacant, it's underutilized, and it's large enough in size to enable the placement of the future building supply store together with the associated parking, driveways, and storage areas while still maintaining significant setbacks from adjacent properties. This next point I think is very important to highlight. The C1 zone, which applies to the property currently, permits a multitude of commercial uses as of right. It actually permits, it provides 30 or 40 commercial uses as of right, and also a number of institutional uses. Those uses would include, but are not limited to, gas stations, automobile sales and service, retail stores, hotels, motels, trailer parks, light manufacturing uses, churches, libraries, hospitals, a nursing home, etc. So the number of uses that are currently permitted on this property are vast, and where this application simply seeks to add a building supply to the very long list of uses that are already permitted. It's our opinion that the proposed addition of a building supply to this long list of permitted uses is consistent with the municipality's vision for the property and is equally as compatible with the adjacent properties as most of the other uses that are already permitted on it. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is a building supply, when compared to a multitude of the uses that are already permitted, in our opinion, is just as compatible as those that are already permitted on the property. It's my opinion that it's both appropriate and desirable to locate commercial development in close proximity to the Highway 400 corridor. And important to note that the site plan has been intentionally designed to mitigate offsite impacts. In large part, this was achieved by establishing these quite significant front, rear, interior, and exterior side yard setbacks. So my final slide, just to reiterate that the zoning amendment proposes to rezone this rurally designated and commercially zoned property from the parent C1 zone to a C1 exception zone to add a building supply outlet as an additional permitted use. also adding a significantly wider interior side yard setback, and that was there simply for the protection of the adjacent properties, and also to request that an accessory building within, let's say, the yard could be up to a height of 12 meters. It's my opinion, as stated earlier, that the application is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement, conforms with the policies of the growth plan of Northern Ontario, and also with the direction provided in the Municipality of McDougall's official plan. I do think that this project represents good land use planning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that members of council or members of the public have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And council did have your slide deck ahead of time, so we had a chance to review all of that. So, but thank you for going through it very comprehensively. Any questions at this point for Mr. Morgan? No. Okay. Maybe I'll just, before we get to our staff report from our planners, maybe I'll just ask, we received that one piece of correspondence only. Is there anyone else present who wishes to make a verbal representation on this issue, either for or against? Just so our planners would have a chance to respond to it when they not seeing anyone else. And Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did mean to touch on that letter from the town of Parry Sound before. Sorry, I meant to touch on it at the end of my presentation there. I did have an opportunity to review the letter. I did make an attempt to contact Mr. Thompson at the town of Parry Sound earlier today. I left a voicemail, but was unable to, I suppose, touch base with him. But it's my opinion that the site plan approval process is an entirely appropriate process in order to satisfy Mr. Thompson's, I wouldn't say concerns that he's expressed, but I think he's saying, look, town of Parry Sound would rather not see the zoning approved before, let's say, an environmental impact study or detailed civil engineering design is undertaken. But I think that those things are most appropriately addressed to the site plan approval stage. You know, and I think when making that statement, we have to look again at the multitude of uses that are already permitted on the property. And all of those uses, or I think all of those uses, would require site plan approval as well here. So really, we just want to, we're seeking to add the building supply as an additional permitted use. And if we can achieve that, then we would proceed with the further detailed professional studies that will be required. And ultimately, this project will not come to fruition until we can satisfy members of council here and staff that all of the concerns, or the couple of concerns expressed by Mr. Thompson here, have been addressed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And no one else indicated they had anything to add or questions. So then I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't really have much to add beyond what Mr. Morgan has indicated in his presentation in terms of background and conformity. The planning report that's been prepared really speaks for itself, and Mr. Morgan has done a very comprehensive job in his presentation in explaining the basis for the proposed amendment and the specifics of it to council this evening. I'll offer my 2 cents on the comments from Parry Sound and the appropriateness of dealing with the environmental report at the site plan stage, as Mr. Morgan has suggested. And I'll just start off by saying that typically, yes, an environmental study is often required before the principle of use for the site is established, and that's at the zoning stage. Whereas the site plan stage deals with more of the technical components of an application and the specific siting of the building and those sorts of things. This is a bit of a unique situation for a couple of reasons. One is that the environmental feature that's identified is a earth science ANSI, so it's a landform feature. It's not a plant, or it's not an animal, or it's not a type of habitat. It's a landform situation. So that's one nuance. The second piece, as Mr. Morgan mentioned, is that the site does have a number of permitted as of right uses on it currently, and the proposal is really to add to those and to allow for additional building heights and specifics related to the siting of the building. So given the unique context, we're satisfied as staff that It would be appropriate at this stage to approve the zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate or to establish the specific principle of land use here. And we're comfortable with deferring that piece to the site plan stage. Certainly no site alteration is permitted on the site until that site plan agreement is executed and that feature's been properly studied. So we're okay with this approach in this instance. Council, just in terms of your options this evening, again, this is the statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. You have two options really tonight. Well, you have a few different options, but your two main options are to either approve the application this evening on the basis that the comments that have been provided have been satisfactorily addressed and you're comfortable with the application, or if there's additional information that you'd like provided, an additional response to the comments that are provided, then certainly you could defer the application for a further report from staff that provides more details on the comments that were provided. I've tried to do that verbally for you tonight to try to expedite things, and I don't think there's a whole lot more we can add in writing on those specific items. So with that, your worship, if there's any comments that council or members of the public have that are directed to staff, I'd be happy to do my best to try to answer those for you this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from council? Councillor Ryman?
Thank you, worship. Just a question regarding Mr. Thompson's letter. He notes that the town of Parry Sound has property adjacent to the subject property. I just want clarification on that. And second of all, I agree with what Mr. Robinson said. I see no reason to hold this up, and I'm going to be recommending we go with option one. So I just want clarification, I guess, on the adjacent property.
Okay, I'll put that question to staff. I took that to mean because they were a neighboring municipality and considering themselves adjacent. I'm not aware they're a property owner in that area. Staff have any other information regarding that? Mrs. West?
That would be correct, your worship, that it's because of the context as being a neighbor boundary wise rather than a neighbor with property.
So there is a 400 series highway in between this property and them.
Point. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Comments? I mean, it'll be up to council later on in the regular council meeting whether we deal with this tonight or not when the bylaw comes up for that point in time. But Councillor Ryman has already expressed that he's in favor of proceeding with it tonight. And I'll say at this point that I'm in favor of proceeding with it tonight. I think it's the concerns raised by Mr. Thompson are best dealt with at the site plan controls stage of this process. Doing it, not surprised that we heard from the town of Parry Sound. Anyway, I would be prepared when we get to that stage, just so people have some sort of foreshadowing as to where council's going. I'm not sure if the other two councillors want to make comment at this point in time or reserve until we get to the bylaw stage. Councillor Milan?
I'm in favor of proceeding at this stage too.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gregory? Oh, you're muted.
Yes, I think we should proceed with what we're doing.
So if there's nothing furthermore for the public meeting, this will conclude the public meeting portion for tonight. And I thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us on this particular development. And have yourselves a good evening.
Thank you for the time. Thank you. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Move on with the regular council meeting agenda for tonight.
One moment, because I'll have